Why does it take most people 18 months to fully get over their ex? Let me break this down for you. When a relationship ends, what happens? You're not just losing a person. You're losing your best friend. You're losing the routine. You're losing the future you thought you were building. And that hits you on every level, emotionally, mentally, physically, and spiritually. Now, most people want to rush healing. They want to feel better in a week or a month. But that's not how it works. It takes about 18 months, sometimes longer, because you're essentially reprogramming your brain. You're breaking old patterns, you're building new ones. During those 18 months, you're going to cycle through memories, you'll replay conversations, you'll imagine what you could have said differently. And yeah, it's going to hurt. That pain is your mind trying to hold on to the past. But here's the truth, holding on to the past keeps you from moving forward. The healing process isn't about forgetting your aches. It's about becoming whole without them. It's about getting back to who you are at your core, before the relationship, before the heartbreak. So when you feel like you're not making progress, remind yourself of this: healing is not linear. Some days you'll feel great. Some days you'll feel like you're back at square one. And that's okay. That's part of the process. 18 months is not just about time, it's about growth. It's about rediscovering yourself. It's about learning the lessons so you don't repeat the same mistakes in your next relationships. And once you come out on the other side, you'll realize something powerful. The breakup wasn't the end. It was the beginning of you becoming the strongest version of yourself. When people go through a breakup, they often underestimate the real weight of what they're losing. They think it's just about missing the person, missing their face, their voice, the physical intimacy. But the truth is the pain goes much deeper than that. You're not just losing a partner. You're losing an entire lifestyle that you built around that person. You're losing the little things. The text messages throughout the day, the late night conversations, the weekend routines, even the silly inside jokes that only the two of you understood. All of that disappears the moment the relationship ends. And that's why it feels so overwhelming. It's not one loss. It's a series of 100 little losses hitting you all at once. Think about it like this. When you're in a relationship, your brain becomes conditioned to that person's presence. It expects their call. It expects their touch. It expects them to be there. Your nervous system literally adapts to their rhythm, just like you would adapt to a new diet, a new job, or a new workout routine. Now, the second that relationship ends, that rhythm is disrupted. Your brain still craves the pattern, but the source of it is gone. And what happens when the brain doesn't get what it expects? Withdrawal. That's why it feels like a drug detox. That's why people say love is addictive, because neurologically it is. And here's where most people struggle. They're not just mourning the person. They're mourning the routine that person gave them. It's not just, I miss my ex. It's, I miss texting good morning. It's, I miss watching our show together. It's, I miss having someone to call when I'm driving home. All those tiny, everyday rituals become ingrained in your life, and when they vanish, you feel like a piece of yourself vanished too. That's why the emptiness hits so hard. You wake up and suddenly there's no one there to check in with, no one to share your day with. And your brain doesn't know how to handle that gap. But it doesn't stop there. You're also losing the future you thought you had. That part is brutal. Because when you're in a relationship, you're not just in the present, you're constantly projecting into the future. You imagine vacations you'll take together, the house you'll buy, the wedding, the kids, the life you'll build side by side. Every time you thought about tomorrow, they were in it. Now suddenly, the picture you carried in your head for months, or maybe years, has been ripped away from you. And your brain has to grieve not only the person, not only the routines, but also the dream of a future that now doesn't exist. And let's be honest, that part stings the most, because the future you imagined felt real. You invested in it emotionally. You invested in it mentally. Every conversation, every plan, every someday, promise. You wove those into the fabric of your identity. And when that future disappears, it feels like your identity disappears with it. That's why people spiral after a breakup. It's not just, I'm sad. It's, who am I without this person? What do I do with all the dreams I had for us? What's left for me now? That's why the grieving process feels so intense. It's not just the loss of love, it's the loss of certainty. Now here's what makes it even tougher. Your routines, your habits, your future, they weren't just built around your partner. They were built with your partner. Meaning, every time you try to hold on to those routines without them, it feels empty. You can still wake up at the same time, you can still watch the same shows, you can still drive the same routes, but the emotional meaning tied to those actions is gone. You feel the ghost of their presence everywhere. That's why so many people say, everything reminds me of them. Because it does. The environment hasn't changed, but the meaning behind it has. And it's that contrast, the routine staying while the person is gone, that makes healing such a long, drawn out process. And because of this, most people go into panic mode. They want to replace their ex immediately. They jump into rebound relationships. They look for distractions. They want anything to stop the pain of losing those routines and that future. But here's the catch: you can't shortcut this process. You can't just slap someone new onto the routines and expect it to feel the same. Because healing isn't about replacement, it's about rebuilding. It's about teaching your brain that life has value and meaning outside of that relationship. And that rebuilding takes time. That's why 18 months is such a realistic time frame. Because you're not just getting over a person, you're rewiring years of patterns, habits, and expectations. So when you sit there wondering, why does this hurt so much? Why can't I just let go? Understand this: you're not weak. You're not broken. You're human. Your heart, your mind, your nervous system, they all invested in that relationship. And what you're going through now is simply the natural process of unwinding those bonds. It's not about forgetting the past. It's about learning how to live fully in the present again. That takes patience. That takes discipline. And above all, that takes self-compassion. Because the more you understand what you're truly grieving, the routines, the habits, the future, the more clarity you'll have about why this process feels so heavy and why it takes so damn long to move forward. When a relationship ends, most people think it's just about moving on or forgetting the other person. They believe they can distract themselves, go out with friends, hit the gym, or date someone new, and everything will magically heal in a couple weeks. But here's the reality: you're not just dealing with memories. You're dealing with biology. Your brain, your nervous system, and your emotional patterns have literally been conditioned to that relationship. When it ends, you don't just turn the switch off. So you have to rewire years of attachment, and rewiring takes time. That's why it doesn't happen overnight. That's why 18 months is often the mark where people finally start to feel whole again. Let's break this down scientifically for a second. When you're with someone you love, your brain releases chemicals, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, that reinforce attachment. Every hug, every kiss, every shared experience floods your system with those feel-good chemicals. Over time, your brain wires itself to associate your partner with pleasure and security. They become your safe place, your comfort zone. Now, when that relationship ends, your brain doesn't stop craving those chemicals. It's like ripping away a drug from an addict. You don't just miss the person. You miss the chemical cocktail your brain got from being with them. That's why you feel anxious. That's why you feel restless. That's why you can't sleep at night. Your body is literally in withdrawal. And here's the part people don't realize: your emotional patterns are tied to your partner too. Think about how many times you turned to them when you were stressed, or when you were happy, or when you wanted validation. Your partner became your go-to for regulating your emotions. That's not just romantic, it's neurological. You trained your brain to link emotional relief with their presence. Now that they're gone, your brain has to relearn how to regulate emotions without them. That's not a one-week project. That's months and months of trial and error, good days and bad days, until your nervous system finally gets the message: I can soothe myself. I can feel safe without them. This is why people relapse into contacting their ex. It's not because they're weak, it's because their brain is screaming for relief. It remembers that reaching out used to make the pain go away, so it tricks you into thinking, maybe if I text them, I'll feel better. And for a moment you might, but it's just like giving an addict one more hit. It resets the whole process. Every time you go back, every time you check their social media, every time you replay old conversations, you're reinforcing the old wiring instead of creating new wirings. That's why no contact is so powerful. It's not about being cold. It's about giving your brain the space to detach and rewire itself properly. But here's the thing: you can't just sit and wait for time to heal you. Time alone doesn't heal. It's what you do with that time. The rewiring process happens through new experiences. Every time you create a new routine, every time you meet new people, every time you focus on your goals, you're teaching your brain life is bigger than that relationship. I can find pleasure, comfort, and joy without that person. Slowly, those new experiences overwrite the old pathways. It's like repaving a road. The more you drive on the new road, the less you use the old one. And eventually, the old road breaks down and fades away. Now, don't get me wrong, this process is not smooth. It's messy. Some days you'll feel strong. You'll feel like you're making progress. And then out of nowhere, a song comes on, or you pass by a place you used to go together, and bam, you're right back in the pain. That's not failure. That's part of the rewiring. Those emotional triggers are like leftover cables your brain hasn't disconnected yet. Each time you feel the pain and choose not to act on it, you're cutting another cable. That's why over time the triggers get weaker. That's why 18 months later, you can hear the same song or walk past the same place and feel nothing, because your brain has finally let go. And that's the beauty of this process. Healing isn't just about surviving the breakup, it's about evolving your wiring. When you finally come out the other side, you're not the same person anymore. You've trained your brain to rely on you instead of someone else. You've learned how to generate your own joy, your own peace, your own stability. And once you've built that wiring, you don't just get over your ex, you become bulletproof in your future relationships. Because you're no longer attached out of fear or dependency. You're choosing love from a place of strength, not desperation. One of the biggest traps people fall into after a breakup is living inside their own head. You replay every little moment, every conversation, every fight. You sit there at night, staring at the ceiling, thinking, if I had just done this differently, maybe we'd still be together. Or if I hadn't said that, maybe they wouldn't have left. It becomes an endless loop of what ifs and should haves. And here's the problem. When you live in that loop, you're not healing. You're stuck because instead of moving forward, your mind is trying to rewrite the past, and the past cannot be rewritten. What people don't understand is this. The brain loves patterns. When something painful happens, the mind wants to analyze it to death because it thinks, if I can just understand what went wrong, I can prevent it from happening again. That's a survival instinct. Your brain doesn't want to repeat pain, so it tries to dissect it. But in the process, you end up torturing yourself. You end up rehearsing conversations that will never happen, imagining scenarios that will never exist, and beating yourself up over things you can't change. That doesn't create closure. It creates suffering. And let's be real, it feels addictive. There's a weird sense of comfort in replaying the past, because even though it hurts, it keeps you connected to your ex. It's like your brain is saying, if I keep thinking about them, then they're still here in some way. That's why people can't stop checking old texts, looking at pictures, or stalking their ex on social media. It's not really about curiosity, it's about clinging to a sense of connection. But the truth is, every time you replay the past, every time you scroll their feed, every time you look at their old messages, you're digging the wound deeper. You're reinforcing the bond instead of breaking it. Here's what makes it worse when you're in that headspace. You're not just replaying reality, you're rewriting it. You start to romanticize the past. You only remember the highlights, the sweet moments, the good times. You forget the problems, the conflicts, the reasons why the relationship ended in the first place. Your brain creates this illusion that everything was perfect, and if only you hadn't messed up, you'd still have your happily ever after. That's dangerous, because it keeps you chasing a fantasy instead of facing the truth. The truth is, if the relationship was right, it wouldn't have ended. The truth is, both of you played your part in why things fell apart. But when you're stuck in replay mode, you don't see reality, you see a distorted version of it. And this is why healing gets delayed. Because instead of building a new future, you're fighting an imaginary battle with the past. You're pouring your emotional energy into scenarios that will never exist. And the more energy you pour into the past, the less energy you have for the present. That's why people feel drained after months of heartbreak. They're exhausted, not from moving forward, but from spinning their wheels in the mud of what if. You can't drive forward if you're constantly staring in the rearview mirror. At some point, you have to turn your head and look at the road ahead. But here's the breakthrough. You don't have to figure out how to fix the past, because the past doesn't need fixing. It already taught you what you needed to learn. That's its only purpose. Every mistake, every fight, every moment of regret, it's all there to make you stronger, wiser, sharper for the future. Once you see that, you stop obsessing over what went wrong and start asking, what did I learn? How do I grow from this? How do I make sure I don't repeat the same mistakes in my next relationship? That shift in perspective changes everything. It takes you out of victim mode and puts you back in control. And when you finally stop replaying the past, you create space for something new. You give your brain room to build fresh memories, fresh routines, fresh connections. You stop bleeding energy into what could have been and start investing it into what can be. That's when healing speeds up. That's when you stop feeling chained to your ex, because you've finally let go of the illusion that the past can be changed. And instead, you've embraced the reality that the future is still yours to create. One of the biggest misconceptions people have about healing from a breakup is thinking they need to erase their ex from their memory. They say things like, I just want to forget them. Leps. I want them out of my head. I don't ever want to think about them again. And while I get why you'd feel that way, that's not the actual goal. Forgetting isn't healing, because even if you could snap your fingers and erase the memories, you'd also erase the lessons. You'd erase the growth. You'd erase everything that relationship taught you about yourself. The truth is, you're never going to forget your ex completely. And you shouldn't. The goal isn't to erase them. The goal is to integrate the experience and come out of it whole, strong, and self-reliant. Think about it. Every relationship you've ever had has shaped you into the person you are right now. The good ones, the bad ones, the ones that broke your heart. They all left their mark. They all revealed something about how you love, how you communicate, what your standards are, and what you're willing to tolerate. Trying to forget your ex is like trying to rip a chapter out of your own book. You can't do it without damaging the story. Instead of ripping it out, you highlight it, you underline the lessons, and you keep moving forward. Because that chapter, as painful as it might be, is still part of the story of you. Now, the reason people want to forget is because they think remembering equals pain. They believe, if I keep thinking about them, I'll never heal. But here's the paradox. The more you try to force yourself to forget, the more you obsess over not thinking about them. You end up giving them even more power. Healing doesn't come from pushing memories away. Healing comes from changing the meaning of those memories. When you can look back and no longer feel wounded, when you can look back and see growth instead of loss, that's when you know you've become whole again. And this is where the idea of wholeness comes in. A lot of people enter relationships from a place of emptiness. They're looking for someone to complete them, to fill the gaps, to give them validation they can't give themselves. That's why breakups feel like death, because when that person leaves, they take your sense of wholeness with them. But here's the truth: wholeness was never supposed to come from them. It was supposed to come from you. Your partner can add to your life, they can enhance it, but they're not responsible for being your source of identity, happiness, or self-worth. That responsibility belongs to you alone. So when I say the goal is not to forget your ex, what I really mean is the goal is to rebuild your sense of self without them. It's about rediscovering who you are when you're not someone's boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, or wife. Who are you at your core? What makes you feel alive? What passions did you put on hold during the relationship? What parts of yourself did you compromise just to keep the peace? Healing is about reclaiming those pieces and putting yourself back together, not as the person you were before the relationship, but as a stronger, wiser version of yourself after it. And here's the beautiful part: when you do that work, when you become whole on your own, you stop being afraid of loss. You stop clinging to people out of fear that you'll fall apart without them. You start choosing relationships not because you need them, but because you want them. That shift is powerful. It changes everything about how you show up in love. You're no longer desperate, no longer dependent, no longer stuck in the cycle of, I can't live without you. Instead, you're in a place of, I love you, but I'll be fine without you. My wholeness doesn't depend on you. And that mindset is what sets you free. So yes, you'll always remember your ex. You remember the laughs, the trips, the late night talks, the lessons, even the pain. But those memories won't control you anymore. They'll just be part of your story. A story that shaped you into the person you've become. When you can stand there whole and complete, not needing them to validate you, not needing them to fix you, but simply grateful for what the experience taught you, that's when you know you've truly healed. Because healing isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering differently. It's about carrying the lessons forward while leaving the pain behind. One of the most frustrating parts of getting over an ex is thinking you're making progress, and then bam, you wake up one morning and feel like you're back at square one. You'll have a great week where you barely think about them. You feel strong, you're focused on your life again. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, a memory hits you, or a song comes on, or you see something that reminds you of them, and you're drowning in sadness all over again. Most people panic when this happens. They think, why am I still feeling this? I thought I was over it. Does this mean I'm broken? Does this mean I'll never heal? And the answer is no. You're not broken. You're not failing. What you're experiencing is normal, because healing is not a straight line. It's a wave. The truth is, grief comes in cycles. It's not a one and done process. You don't just cry for a few weeks and suddenly everything is fine. Healing moves in phases, and those phases loop back around. One day you feel acceptance, the next day you feel anger, the next day you feel sadness, and sometimes you feel all three within the same hour. That's how emotional recovery works. It's messy, it's unpredictable. And if you expect it to be linear, you'll drive yourself crazy. The sooner you accept that healing has ups and downs, the more patience you'll have with yourself. Here's why it happens when you're rewiring from a breakup. Different layers of emotions rise to the surface at different times. Sometimes you're grieving the loss of the routines. Other times you're grieving the loss of the future. Sometimes you're triggered by a memory that brings up guilt. Other times you're triggered by loneliness. Each wave is your brain processing a different part of the loss. So when that sadness comes back weeks or months later, it doesn't mean you're back at the beginning. It just means another layer is being worked through. Think of it like peeling an onion. Every layer you peel stings a little, but each layer gets you closer to the core of your healing. And here's the mistake people make: they resist the lows. They think, I shouldn't feel this way anymore. They judge themselves for crying, for missing their ex, for feeling triggered. But the more you resist, the more you suffer. The key is to ride the wave. When a low hits, don't shame yourself. Don't panic. Recognize it for what it is, just another wave passing through. The emotion is temporary. It won't last forever. If you let yourself feel it without judgment, it moves through you much faster. But if you fight it, if you resist it, if you tell yourself you're weak for feeling it, you actually get stuck in it longer. Think about it like surfing. When a wave comes, you don't stand there trying to stop the ocean. You don't yell at the water for knocking you down. You learn how to ride it. Some waves you'll handle smoothly. Some will knock you on your ass. But either way, you get back up. Healing works the same way. The emotional waves are going to come whether you like it or not. The choice you have is whether to resist them and suffer or ride them and grow. And the more waves you ride, the stronger you get at handling them. Eventually, the waves lose their power. They become smaller, easier to manage, until one day they barely move you at all. Now, let me tell you something important. Just because you feel good for a while and then feel bad again doesn't mean you've lost progress. Progress isn't about never feeling pain again. Progress is about recovering faster when the pain comes. In the beginning, a trigger might ruin your entire week. Later, it might ruin your day. And eventually, it might only sting for a few minutes. That's healing. That's growth. It's not about eliminating the waves. It's about becoming resilient enough that the waves can't drown you anymore. And the beauty of this non-linear process is that it builds strength. Every time you ride out a wave, every time you survive a low, you're proving to yourself that you can handle it. You're training your nervous system to trust that the pain will pass. And that trust is what allows you to open your heart again in the future without fear. Because, even if love ends, even if you get hurt again, you'll survive, you'll get back up, you'll heal. That's the gift of a non-linear journey. It doesn't just heal you, it transforms you into someone who is unshakable. When people hear 18 months to get over your ex, they roll their eyes. They think, that's too long. I can't wait a year and a half to feel better. I need to move on now. But what they don't realize is that the 18 months isn't some magical number pulled out of thin air. It's not about the clock ticking. It's about the process of growth that takes place inside those 18 months. It's about the way you rediscover yourself, the way you rebuild your identity, the way you transform from someone who is dependent on another person for happiness into someone who stands strong on their own. That takes time, not because you're weak, but because growth always takes time. Here's the truth: when a breakup happens, the person you thought you were gets shattered. You're left questioning everything. Your worth, your choices, your ability to love, even your ability to be loved. It feels like a part of your identity was ripped out of you. And in a way it was, because for months, maybe years, you built an identity around being with your ex. You were half of a couple. You were someone's partner. And when that ends, you don't just lose them, you lose the version of yourself that only existed in that relationship. Those 18 months are about rebuilding your identity, brick by brick, into something stronger and more authentic. And that rebuilding doesn't happen quickly, because every step forward requires you to let go of the illusions you held on to. It requires you to stop clinging to the fantasy of what could have been. It requires you to face the reality of what was. And that's hard work. That's why people fight it. That's why they distract themselves with rebounds, alcohol, work, or endless scrolling on social media. Because sitting with yourself, facing the truths, and rediscovering who you are without your ex, that's uncomfortable. But it's in that discomfort where growth is born. During those 18 months, you start peeling back the layers. At first, you're grieving the loss. Then, you're questioning your patterns. Why did I put up with that behavior? Why didn't I speak up about what I wanted? Why did I ignore the red flags? Those questions hurt, but they're necessary. Because the more honest you get with yourself, the more clarity you gain. You stop blaming your ex for everything and you start owning your part in the relationship. That ownership is what allows you to grow. It's what ensures that the next relationship you step into, you won't repeat the same mistakes. But the real magic of those 18 months is the rediscovery. Because as the dust settles, you begin to reconnect with passions you forgot about. Maybe you pick up an old hobby. Maybe you go back to the gym. Maybe you dive into your career with new energy. Maybe you start traveling or making new friends. Slowly, you remember what life feels like when it's centered around you instead of someone else. So that's when confidence starts to build. That's when you stop needing external validation and start creating internal fulfillment. That's when you begin to feel whole again. And as you grow, something powerful happens. You start to look back on the relationship differently. The pain softens, the longing fades. Instead of seeing it as the end of your happiness, you see it as the catalyst for your growth. You realize that without that heartbreak, you wouldn't have pushed yourself to evolve. You wouldn't have rediscovered who you truly are. Those 18 months, which at first felt like punishment, reveal themselves as preparation. Preparation for the next chapter of your life. Preparation for love that's deeper, healthier, and more aligned with who you've become. So when you think about the 18 months, don't see it as a sentence you have to serve. See it as an opportunity. It's not just about waiting until you forget your ex. It's about using that time to rebuild your foundation, to rediscover your passions, to reclaim your self-worth, to grow into the person who doesn't just survive heartbreak, but thrives because of it. That's why it takes 18 months. Not because time magically heals, but because you need that space to transform. And when you finally come out the other side, you're not the same person who went in. You're stronger, you're wiser, you're more whole, and that's the real purpose of the journey. When a breakup hits, most people see it as the end of their world. They sit there thinking, my life is over. I'll never find anyone like them again. I've lost my chance at happiness. That mindset is dangerous because it traps you in despair. But here's the truth. You're not standing at the end of your story. You're standing at the start of a new chapter. A breakup is not a death sentence. It's a rebirth. It's the universe stripping away what no longer serves you so you can step into something better, stronger, more aligned with who you really are. And when you shift your perspective from this is the end to this is the beginning, the entire experience changes. Think about it. Every great transformation in life is born out of loss. The athlete doesn't push to their limits until they've failed. The entrepreneur doesn't innovate until something collapses. And you don't evolve into your strongest self until life forces you out of your comfort zone. A breakup is one of the most brutal ways the universe pushes you out of your comfort zone. It tears down the illusion that someone else is the source of your happiness. It forces you to face yourself. It forces you to dig deep, to build strength, to discover what you're truly made of. Without that heartbreak, you'd stay stagnant. With it, you're pushed to grow. And let's be honest, growth doesn't feel good in the beginning. It feels like hell. It feels like you've been ripped apart, like you're lost, like you'll never be okay again. But that's how transformation always begins. Just like muscles have to be torn to grow stronger, your heart has to be broken open for you to grow emotionally and spiritually. That pain you're feeling, that emptiness, that's not the end of you. That's the cracking open of the shell you've been living in. And once it cracks, once the pieces fall apart, that's when the rebuilding begins. That's when the strongest version of you starts to emerge. During this rebuilding, you learn things about yourself you never knew. You learn that you can survive what you thought would kill you. You learn that you can wake up every morning, even when it hurts, and keep going. You learn that your happiness doesn't have to depend on anyone else. That realization is life-changing. Because once you've lived through heartbreak and come out stronger, you carry an unshakable confidence, deep down, that no matter what happens in the future, you'll be okay. And that's freedom. That's power. That's what makes you unstoppable. A breakup also forces you to raise your standards. You start reflecting on the relationship, on what worked and what didn't. You recognize where you settled, where you ignored red flags, where you betrayed your own boundaries just to keep the peace. And once you've faced that, you promise yourself, never again, you stop tolerating bullshit. You stop giving your time to people who don't value you. You stop chasing love that isn't reciprocated. Instead, you start demanding alignment. You start seeking relationships that actually add to your life instead of draining it. And that shift doesn't just make you stronger, it makes you wiser. Now, here's the thing most people miss: the strongest version of you doesn't emerge by accident. It emerges by choice. A breakup gives you two paths. One, you can stay stuck, wallow in self-pity, blame your ex, and cling to the past. Or two, you can use the pain as fuel. You can decide, I'm going to use this heartbreak to level up. I'm going to use it to get fitter, sharper, more focused. I'm going to create a life so good that I never again rely on someone else to complete me. That choice is what separates the people who stay broken from the people who come out unstoppable. And the choice is always yours. And the beautiful part, once you evolve into that strongest version of yourself, love stops being about desperation. It stops being about filling a void. Instead, it becomes about sharing abundance, because you're no longer looking for someone to fix you. You've already fixed yourself. You're no longer clinging out of fear of being alone. You're already whole on your own. From that place of strength, you attract better relationships. You attract partners who meet you at your level, who respect your boundaries, who appreciate the evolved version of you. That's the gift of heartbreak. It forces you to become the kind of person who not only survives love lost, but thrives because of it